Tonight's top story, fascism. Are we already living under it without even realizing? Let's start with a few questions. Do you feel like you're working more but are somehow earning less? Do you sense your ability to influence political decision is slowly shrinking? Are you being told to accept more and more with less and less in return? Do you like Hitler? Here is the uncomfortable truth. We're not approaching the end of democracy. We're already deep into its unraveling. This isn't a dramatic coup. There are no tanks in the streets. And that's kind of the point. Democracies rarely collapse overnight. They erode slowly, piece by piece. And by the time most people start to notice, it's often too late. So tonight, we're breaking down what fascism actually looks like in this modern era and why so many of its warning signs are happening right now here in the US. Let's talk about the facts, not opinions, not outrage, just the documented actions of a political leader and what they mean for American democracy. Across the country, states like Texas, Missouri, Ohio, Florida, and Indiana have all faced credible accusations of gerrymandering, strategically redrawing districts to rig electoral outcomes in favor of one party. But it doesn't just stop at voting maps. Some lawmakers are now even openly suggesting changes to the 22nd Amendment, the one that limits US presidents to 2 terms. And then there's the rhetoric. In 2017, Trump issued a travel ban targeting several majority Muslim countries. That same year, he falsely claimed that immigrants from Haiti all have AIDS. He even fabricated that bizarre story of migrants eating dogs. He referred to white nationalists in Charlottesville, people carrying torches and chanting Nazi slogans, as very fine people. He separated children from their parents at the border using executive orders. He declared a national emergency to redirect funds toward a campaign promise, the border wall, something that today barely is even talked about in political discourse. He amplified conspiracy groups like QAnon, suggested that bleach could cure COVID, and even invited foreign interference into a US election, publicly. And when he lost the 2020 election, rather than accept the results, he spread lies about election fraud, rallied his supporters, and ultimately incited a violent insurrection at the US Capitol. Behind the scenes, he purged officials who wouldn't bend the knee, replacing them with loyalists, regardless of competency. His administration had one of the highest turnover rates in modern history, and many of its key figures were indicted or convicted of federal crimes. And this brings us to a pattern that should feel eerily familiar to anyone who studied history. Loyalty over competence, obedience over expertise, the consolidation of power over democratic accountability. Even the US military was deployed in American cities, often over the objections of the governors. Peaceful protesters, journalists, and civilians were met with tear gas, rubber bullets, and force for simply exercising their rights. To those conservatives who claim that they fear big government, this is big government, not in the form of social programs or public services, but in the form of unchecked executive power, political purges, and authoritarian control. To understand fascism, let's look at our golden boy of an example. Not Trump, but Hitler. Well, and Trump, but more on him later. Hitler, was he a bad guy? Did he not give us Volkswagen, the Autobahn? And was his mustache kind of goated? It's the early 20th century. Germany, once proud and imperial, have just suffered one of the most crushing defeats in modern history. The First World War leaves the country physically ruined, psychologically humiliated, and politically fractured. In the aftermath, a fragile new democracy, the Weimar Republic, is born, but is from the outset profoundly unloved by many. The economy collapsed, confidence in the government eroded, and slowly a dangerous question began to echo across German society. Who is to blame for all of this? Not only does it represent a break from Germany's past monarchy, it also bears the burden of signing the Treaty of Versailles, a peace agreement that in many German eyes wasn't peace at all, but punishment. The treaty demanded that Germany accept full responsibility for the war, pay massive reparations, cede territory and drastically reduce its military. The economy collapsed, confidence in the government eroded, and slowly a dangerous question began to echo across German society. Who is to blame for all of this? In a Munich beer hall in 1919, a young veteran named Adolf Hitler attends a meeting of a small political group called the German Workers' Party. Disoriented by defeat and resentment, he finds not only a cause, but his main purpose. He quickly becomes the movement's most charismatic speaker. By 1920, the group rebrands itself as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party for short. Their message was both simple and brutal. Jews and communists are to blame. The German race is superior. The Treaty of Versailles must be destroyed. And, of course, Germany must rise again. In a time of confusion, Hitler offered certainty, and in a time of shame, he was offering pride. By 1923, Germany's economy is in a freefall. Hyperinflation renders money nearly worthless. Hitler decides now is finally the time to seize power by force. But this beer hall putsch fails. He is arrested, and he's tried for treason and sent to prison. There, in a small cell, he writes Mein Kampf, or My Struggle, a disturbing manifesto that outlines his vision of a racially pure authoritarian Germany. This putsch failed, but Hitler now has something perhaps more powerful than success: publicity. In 1932, Hitler runs for president. He loses, but the Nazi Party becomes the largest in the Reichstag. No party can form a stable majority. Chaos reigns in parliament. Conservative elites, fearing communism more than Nazism, believe they can use Hitler to stabilize the country, to harness his popularity. So, on January 30th, 1933, Hitler is appointed Chancellor of Germany. What they don't realize, what they fatally underestimate, is that Hitler has a much grander secret agenda. Within months, he consolidates power, democracy unravels, and the machinery of the dictatorship begins. First, they came for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the trade unions, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't in a trade union. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Oh, poor Nazi me. Hitler's ascent to power was catalyzed by a nation's collective grief and disillusionment following a devastating war. Germany's post-World War I environment was defined by economic instability, widespread unemployment, and a profound sense of national humiliation. These conditions fostered resentment, hopelessness, and a desperate yearning for renewal, sentiments that Hitler and the Nazi Party often exploited. Central to their rise was the propagation of this false narrative that placed blame for Germany's struggles on those deemed un-German, including Jews, socialists, and foreign powers. The Nazis built a national movement grounded in exclusionary identity politics, emphasizing radical purity and the restoration of German greatness. Once in power, Hitler and the Nazi regime implemented a systemic program of media control and intellectual suppression to consolidate their totalitarian rule. Their strategy was clear: eliminate dissent, shape public perception, and re-engineer German culture and education to align with the Nazi ideology. In 1933, Hitler appointed Joseph Goebbels as Minister of Propaganda. His mission was to reshape how Germans thought. State media became a weapon. Films, newspapers, public rallies, all carefully designed to control the narrative. Dissenting voices were silenced. Journalists who resisted were jailed, exiled, or killed. Education, too, transformed into a tool of obedience. Schools rewrote history, universities purged independent thinkers, and the Hitler Youth trained children to idolize the state from an early age. Then came the book burnings. On May 10, 1933, Nazi students destroyed works by Freud, Marx, Einstein, Hemingway, any author who didn't fit in their ideology. It wasn't just censorship, it was a deliberate destruction of free thought. And if this history feels familiar, that's just because it is. That same playbook appears today in the rise of modern authoritarian movements, exploiting fear, weaponizing lies, targeting the vulnerable, and bending reality through media control. When some call parts of Trump's America fascistic, it's not an exaggeration, it's a warning that the lessons of the 1930s are still unfolding right before our eyes. He spoke plainly and brazenly, language that resonated with many everyday individuals who had felt overlooked in previous elections. A demographic largely composed of working-class white Americans, often marginalized by academic institutions from an early age, and they're dismissed by elite liberal circles. They found a sense of visibility and voice in the national discourse through him. And the hard truth is that he thinks you're kind of stupid. He thinks that you're easily manipulated. And to some extent, he's a little correct. The average person, overwhelmed by work, family responsibilities, and the demands of daily life, simply lack the time or capacity to deeply engage with the complexities of modern political systems. His advisors understand that division among the populace, and it's a powerful tool for maintaining control. As long as people are given just enough to survive, they are unlikely to rebel or demand systemic change. By fostering suspicion and resentment toward those who look or live differently, attention is diverted from the true source of inequality, the concentrated accumulation of capital and power at the top. Under capitalism, individuals are conditioned to admire and even aspire to the very systems and figures that oppress them, romanticizing the improbable notion that through exploitation of their own communities, they too might one day ascend to power. Trump is currently testing the limits of American democracy. Across the country, in states like Texas, Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio, Florida, and Indiana, his allies have been quietly redrawing the political map, literally. It's called gerrymandering, and it's one of the most effective ways to tilt an election before a single vote is even cast. Here's how it works. You take a map of voters, and you slice it up in a way that guarantees your side wins, no matter what the people actually want. The result? Elections that look fair on paper, but aren't. This is happening in state houses that Trump has influence over. Legislators loyal to him are reshaping districts to protect Republican majorities, and by extension, his political power. When that happens, accountability disappears. The people who draw the maps choose their voters, instead of voters choosing them. And that's the kind of system that doesn't just bend democracy, it breaks it. In the United States, there is this rule, a hard limit on how long one person can be president. It's called the 22nd Amendment. It was ratified in 1951 and basically says that any president can have 2 terms. That's it. The idea was simple. No president should ever hold on to power long enough to start acting like a king. Then, in early 2025, something pretty wild actually happened. A Republican congressman from Tennessee, Andy Ogles, actually introduced a resolution to change the Constitution. The goal here was to clear the way for Donald Trump to run a 3rd term. Now, you could say that this is just Trump being Trump, that he's joking. That's all just part of the show. But here's the thing. When people inside government start writing down those jokes as actual proposals, it's not really a joke anymore. Even if more Republicans start to brush us off, the fact that this kind of talk is happening at all matters.
Because every time a leader tests a democratic norm, and they get away with it, it moves, shifts the line of what's acceptable just a little bit further. And that's how ideas that once felt unthinkable, like changing term limits for one person, they start to feel normal. Earlier this year, it was showcased as a joke, but have a listen to a more recent clip of him actually being serious about it.
For you to be able to run and potentially win a third term in 2028, is that something you'd be willing to challenge the court to be?
Well, I haven't really thought about it. We have some very good people, as you know, but I have the best poll numbers I've ever had. I mean, I just solved 8 wars and a 9th is coming. I believe Russia, Ukraine will happen.
You said that for 2028, they're very good people.
Well, we have great people. I don't have to get into that, but we have one of them standing right here. We have JD, obviously. The vice president is great. I think Marco's great. I think, I'm not sure if anybody would run against us. I think if they ever formed a group, it would be unstoppable. I really do. I believe that. I would love to do it. I have my best numbers ever. It's very terrible. I have my best numbers. If you read it, am I not ruling it out? You'll have to tell me. All I can tell you is that we have a great group of people, which they do.
And then there's Steve Bannon, a former Republican strategist for Trump, openly saying this in the media.
The elites of the nation.
And does he need a third term in order to see that job through?
Well, he's going to get a third term. So Trump 28. Trump is going to be president in 28. And people just ought to get accommodated with that.
So what about the 22nd Amendment?
There's many different alternatives. At the appropriate time, we'll lay out what the plan is. But there's a plan, and President Trump will be the president in 28.
Bannon, Trump, and Putin are all playing by the same authoritarian strategy, which is flooding the zone with information. Flooding the zone with so much noise, so much disinformation, that people stop knowing what's true. And when no one trusts anything, or anyone has a certain allegiance, no one can actually organize against you. And that's the point, to kind of keep this chaos going. Because when everything feels like chaos, power stays in the hands of the person creating it.
In today's political landscape, finding a shared sense of truth in America feels increasingly impossible. What we're witnessing is a kind of large-scale gaslighting, an intentional blurring of reality that leaves many unsure when to turn to credible information. And that's not an accident. Donald Trump thrives in that confusion. In fact, he spent years cultivating it, disorienting the public, undermining trusted institutions, and punishing anyone whose version of events challenge his own.
When Donald Trump fired FBI Director James Comey, it was a turning point for a lot of people. It looked like a president trying to shut down an investigation, one that was digging into Russian interference in the 2016 election. That move alone triggered a chain reaction. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein appointed Robert Mueller to take over the case. And Mueller's report later detailed multiple moments where Trump may have tried to obstruct justice, including the Comey firing. It wasn't just political drama at this point. It was a test of how far a president could go before breaking the system. Political scientists Stephen Lebitsky and Daniel Ziblatt, the guys who wrote How Democracies Die, they point to Trump firing of James Comey as one of the first real tests of American democratic guardrails. They call it classic authoritarian behavior, a leader targeting the institutions meant to hold him accountable. The message was unmistakable. Challenge the president, and you might just lose your job. And then there's the receipt of Jimmy Kimmel. In September of 2023, under pressure from the Trump administration, ABC pulled Jimmy Kimmel off the air, all because of that one monologue about the murder of Charlie Kirk. He was calling out the people trying to politicize Kirk's death, what he called the mega gang trying to twist the story for political points. But his critics, they seized onto one single ambiguous line, and they kind of ran with it. And then Trump went further, calling Kimmel an arm of the DNC, and suggesting his show might even be an illegal campaign contribution. Trump even said that he was going to test ABC on this. When Kimmel came back, he fired right back at him, calling it anti-American, and warning that this was more than just his show. It's a continued pattern of the assault on free speech and censoring any form of criticism towards the current administration. Trump directly celebrated the cancellation of a media figure who criticized his movement.
We tend to assume that the media simply exists to inform us. an impartial mirror held up in the world reflecting facts with quiet accuracy. But this, at best, is a comforting fiction. For, at its noblest, the media's role is a functioning democracy. Fuck. We tend to assume that the media simply exists to inform us. An impartial mirror held up to the world reflecting facts with quiet accuracy. But this, at best, is a comforting fiction. For at its noblest, the media's role in a functioning democracy is far more ambitious. It serves as a counterweight to concentrated power, wherever that power may lie, whether it lies in governments, corporations, or elite institutions. And yet, what happens when that vital role is quietly abandoned? Well, in many cases, we not just see a failure, but a subtle betrayal. A climate begins to form, not of clarity, but of confusion. Not of transparency, but one of carefully managed perception. And rather than challenging power, the media begins to echo it. This shift is rarely dramatic. It's not always a matter of outright lies, but of something gentler. And therefore, it looks a little more insidious and dangerous. War becomes a campaign. The cries of the oppressed are weighed equally against the polished justifications of the powerful. Labor movements are barely mentioned or dismissed as fringe. Truth gives way to access, and slowly the media ceases to become a watchdog, but becomes something altogether more obedient, a mouthpiece, a stagehand in the theater of control.
Universities are a space of liberation where people can be educated not just for their careers, but to become more self-critical, to become more engaged citizens capable of transforming unjust systems. Academic freedom is seen as essential, not to protect the status quo, but to allow scholars to think critically about the power structures that we in, whether it be economic, political, or social. They help us develop knowledge that serves the public good rather than private profit, and they can avoid corporate capture that would stifle dissenting or even radical thought. Speaking personally, I don't think university ever radicalized me, whatever that means. Rather, I do think it just gave me a variety of different perspectives, an opportunity to learn how corruption is quietly sown plainly in our discourse, right in front of our eyes. And then there's Trump, who has repeatedly portrayed colleges and universities as bastions of the radical left, out of control with liberal bias, being very anti-American, anti-religion, and even anti-free speech, which is really hypocritical and ironic considering the receipts that we're about to go through. So firstly, in a social media statement that prompted alarm from free speech advocates, Donald Trump threatened to halt all federal funding for any college or school that allowed for quote-unquote illegal protests, and vowed to imprison any agitator. Then there was over 100 students arrested and suspended from the protests at the Columbia University last year over the genocide of Gaza. Then came the broader purge. Funding was frozen for schools like Cornell, Northwestern, Penn, and Princeton, supposedly over anti-Semitism or race-based hiring. But in many of those cases, there was really no clear reason at all. Brown University eventually settled, agreeing to adopt administration's definitions of what male and female are, and to remove race from admissions. Trump actually celebrated this on social media, saying woke is officially dead at Brown. And then there was Harvard. In April, the administration froze $2.2 billion in federal grants, citing civil rights violations. Officials demanded Harvard and its DEI programs overhaul hiring and admissions, and even restructure its leadership. The university refused, and the court ruled that Trump's administration had violated the law by terminating the grants. The judge called the moves a targeted, ideologically motivated assault, and blocked any further cuts to Harvard's federal funding. And then the biggest move yet happened. In March, Trump signed an executive order to shut down the Department of Education, shifting power back to the states. By July, the Supreme Court cleared the way for him to fire more than 1,200 federal education workers.
In moments of political upheaval, it's easy to focus on just the personalities, the figureheads who dominate headlines. But this isn't just about one man. It's about something subtler and more enduring. The quiet normalization of a world in which education becomes a battlefield and experts are ridiculed. What's at stake is not merely the autonomy of universities, but the very principle that intellectual life should remain free to question, to critique, and to imagine alternatives. When the machinery of the state is used to punish institutions for dissent, when legal threats and funding cuts become tools of control, we're witnessing more than policy shifts. We're witnessing an erosion of spaces where independent thought is still possible. This isn't about lawsuits or funding. It's about fear. It's about creating a climate in which institutions and the individuals within them begin to doubt their right to challenge, to resist, and to speak freely. It is, in essence, a quiet war on intellectualism itself, an effort to delegitimize the source of insight and critique that stand as a counterweight to authoritarian impulses. When truth is politicized and knowledge is made to serve ideology, we lose more than academic freedom. We lose a piece of our collective capacity to think clearly and to also empathize with other people's worldviews.
Che tradisce muore, la famiglia è tutto. Mamma mia, danna Trump.
So we're not going to ignore the fact that Trump has a history and ties to the Italian mafia. One, because it's kind of fun, and two, it's also how he attempts to run his government. In the 1980s, Trump had ties to Fat Tony Salerno, boss of the Genovese crime family, when he was constructing his buildings in New York. In his purchasing of the casino in Atlantic City, he allegedly was in bed with the mafia associates. And most importantly, his personal lawyer was Roy Cohn. He also represented the Genovese family. Kind of swag, to be real, but that experience shaped how he manages politics. Donald Trump's use of the presidential pardon has been anything but normal. Traditionally, pardons are about a mercy, second chances. And under Trump, they become a tool to reward loyalty. Let's look at the pattern. Paul Manafort, his campaign chair, convicted of tax fraud and bank fraud, pardoned. Roger Stone, his political strategist, convicted of witness tampering, sentence commuted. Michael Flynn, national security advisor, who lied to the FBI about Russia, pardoned. George Papadopoulos, or however you pronounce the name, same deal. Even Charles Kushner, the father of Trump's son-in-law, got clemency. Steve Bannon, convicted of fraud, also pardoned. 2 Republican congressmen, corruption charges, pardoned again. Then came the January 6 ties, Proud Boy leader Enrico Tarrio, and others involved in that attack. They were granted clemency. And, most recently, Trump commuted the sentence of George Santos, convicted of wire fraud, and pardoned 23 anti-abortion activists convicted of blocking clinics. ICE, or U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It was created after 9/11 to enforce immigration laws and to protect national security. But over time, it's become something else entirely. It's now an agency with massive power and almost no accountability. They've proven time and time again that they're above the law. ICE has ignored court orders, they've violated due process, and deported people who had no legal right to be removed. Like this Maryland father with legal protections, or a Turkish Fulbright scholar detained without cause. These aren't mistakes, they're signs of an agency that answers only to one person, the president. Or how about them making this a modern surveillance state? Under Trump, ICE built one of the most advanced domestic surveillance systems in US history, using facial recognition, biometrics, and data from private companies like Palantir. All of it being under the wraps, all of it without any oversight. And then they're using militarized force in cities. ICE raids have started to look more like paramilitary operations. They're heavily armed agents storming neighborhoods and clashing with protesters, like what happened in Minneapolis in 2025. It's less about justice and more about what they control. And continuing the theme on blind loyalty, Trump's border chief, Tom Homan, once said, "We're not stopping. I don't care about what the judges think." That's not law enforcement, that's political obedience. Together, these pieces paint a clear picture. ICE isn't just about enforcing immigration law. It's acting like a tool of authoritarian power, using fear, surveillance, and force to push a political agenda.
Modern conservatism today is fundamentally unprincipled, and for anyone outside the millionaire class, often entails voting against their own economic interest. At my core, I do believe conservatives are good people. They've just been systemically disenfranchised by large institutions from an early age. While it's understandable that modern conservatives have grown disillusioned with traditional institutions, often for legitimate reasons, they have unfortunately been swayed by a charismatic conman who speaks their language but perpetuates harmful agendas. There is no doubt that most people simply don't have the time or resource to engage deeply with politics. They exist within a system deliberately designed to sap their energy and maintain their lack of power. Meanwhile, they are fed divisive narratives that redirect their frustration toward groups with different life experiences, rather than confronting the systemic issues that continue to erode democracy and diminish the political agency of the individual. The fundamental truth is that conservatives and progressives need to be allies engaged in the same broader class struggle. Despite ideological differences, our shared goal is the well-being of individuals and communities, improving access to quality healthcare, ensuring equitable education, strengthening families, and fostering dignity and opportunity for every person. I recognize that many conservatives have faced significant hardships throughout their lives, and often they feel marginalized or unfairly criticized for their perspectives. It is true that voices on the left can sometimes come across as overly critical, elitist, or dismissive. This only deepens divides rather than bridges them. We on the left must acknowledge this failing and commit to listening more empathetically and respectfully. At the same time, I hope this openness can be reciprocated, creating a foundation of mutual understanding and respect. Only through genuine dialogue and solidarity can we begin to address the systemic inequalities that affect all of us, and not have such a shitty life.